Hey everyone, it's Caitlin back with another literature review. Today we are looking at the third intensive care bundle with blood pressure reduction in acute cerebral hemorrhage trial, or the INTERACT-3 study that came out in Lancet in May of 2023. A little bit of background to start. Intracerebral hemorrhage is the most serious and least treatable form of stroke, and it accounts for approximately 20% of the almost 20 million new strokes that occur globally each year. Because elevated blood pressure is common after the onset of ICH and is strongly associated with poor outcomes, a central component of the management of patients is to provide treatment to lower blood pressure towards a systolic target of less than 140 millimeters of mercury. Currently, the absence of a proven medical or surgical treatment for ICH has resulted in an absence of urgency to treat these patients and a low threshold for withdrawal of care, in contrast to modern systems of care for the acute ischemic stroke. This study aims to establish the impact of a goal-directed care bundle protocol on functional outcomes in a broad range of patients with acute spontaneous intracerebral hemorrhage. So for the design, this was an international, multi-center, prospective, stepped wedge, cluster randomized, blinded, outcome-assessed, controlled trial that was primarily undertaken in low and middle income countries. It has a hybrid discovery implementation design in which the hospitals were prospectively followed to establish their outcomes during their usual care before they are randomly allocated to switch from their control usual care to the intervention implementation at different time points. The reason they did it this way was to mirror the natural process of rolling out a new quality improvement policy. And they did look at the implementation of a care bundle for intracerebral hemorrhage in patients who presented within 6 hours of symptom onset. And this bundle involved normalization of 4 physiologic parameters within the first 1 hour. This included early intensive blood pressure management with a target systolic less than 140, blood glucose control with a target glucose of 110 to 140 or 140 to 180, depending on if the patient had diabetes or not. Treatment of pyrexia to a target body temperature less than 37.5, and reversal of anticoagulation to an INR of less than 1.5. Of note, this was specific to warfarin. There was no mention of DOACs in this study at all, but I take that to imply that DOACs weren't commonly used in the countries where this study was performed, so that wasn't necessarily something they needed to look at. Their primary outcome was functional recovery at 6 months using the modified Rankin scale, and their secondary outcomes included the proportion of patients with death or major disability, death at 6 months, death or neurologic deterioration at 7 days, health-related quality of life at 6 months, and all-cause and cause-specific serious adverse events. As for their results, they found that the likelihood of a poor functional outcome was lower in the care bundle group than the usual care group, and that patients in the care bundle group had fewer serious adverse events than those in the usual care group. Breaking down the components of the care bundle, the biggest piece of the puzzle here was blood pressure control. The cause of the hemorrhage was thought to be hypertension in around 94% of their patients, and 90% of the patients had a systolic blood pressure greater than 140 on presentations. 36% of the patients had an elevated blood glucose, and 1 to 2% each had a fever and elevated INR. And so a higher proportion of patients in the care bundle group did receive an antihypertensive in the first 24 hours compared to the usual group, and the target of systolic less than 140 was achieved more rapidly in the bundle group, with a median time to target of 2.3 hours versus 4 hours in the usual care group. So even though they didn't hit the goal of target systolic within 1 hour, the blood pressure management was still more aggressive in the bundle group. It should also be noted that the glucose and temperature management was also more efficient in the bundle group as well, while there wasn't any difference in anticoagulation management. As for their various secondary outcomes, for the most part, there was either no difference in these or a benefit was shown in the care bundle group. So there's a lot more data in this study. They look at breaking down the impacts of the different patient populations, of the effects of the COVID pandemic on recruitment, but I don't have a ton of time to go into all of those, but if that's something that interests you, I definitely recommend digging into more of the meat of this study. That being said, the authors overall concluded that the implementation of a care bundle protocol incorporating the early control of elevated blood pressure, blood glucose, body temperature, and correction of abnormal coagulation resulted in an improved functional outcome at 6 months, as well as improved survival, health-related quality of life, and fewer serious adverse events. So, takeaways, what does this mean for us? The authors mentioned that the overall treatment effect seems to have been driven by intensive blood pressure lowering, and looking at their data, I would tend to agree. We already have literature that supports blood pressure control in this patient population, so we know that that is a major factor in these outcomes. I do think the biggest thing to remember in this study is the patient population and how that may or may not compare to the patients that you're seeing at your facility. For example, only around 1 to 2% of their patients in either group were on anticoagulation, and all of these patients were on warfarin. I don't have the data handy for my ED where I practice, but I would venture to guess, based on what I see regularly, that at least a quarter of our bleeds are anticoagulated, and of those patients, it's probably higher, but we're going conservative here, but probably 75% of those patients who are anticoagulated are on a DOAC as opposed to being on warfarin. It definitely doesn't diminish the importance of blood pressure control at all, but I think it's something important to remember to look at when looking at this study. How does it compare to the people that you're seeing on a regular basis? They also didn't explicitly detail what usual care was at each of these sites, so we don't know exactly was taking place before the care bundle. But for example, when I look at the order sets my shop uses for ICH, we're already focusing on prompt blood pressure control, as well as reversal of anticoagulation. We also routinely treat for fever and hyperglycemia. But I would say I would be lying if I said that the last two are things that I routinely focus on for my brain bleeds. Yes, if they're extremely abnormal, I'm going to be working on it. I'm going to be focusing on it. But I honestly don't remember the last time I looked at a blood sugar of, low 200s in a bleed and thought of that as a priority. Yes, if my patients are looking like DKA on top of the bleed, that's a priority. But this is, I think, a good reminder to focus on some of those other parameters a little bit as well. Overall, I don't think this is a practice-changing study, but it is that good reminder that we need to be looking at the whole patient and not getting tunnel vision on the big interventions. Yes, blood pressure management and anticoagulation reversal are super important. Those are can't-miss interventions on these patients. We definitely need to be doing those. But this does kind of remind us that some of those smaller physiologic abnormalities may add up as well. And maybe we need to refocus on those too, bringing back in that focus to the blood glucose targets, the body temperature targets. And this is where an updated bundle could potentially have benefit, even in well-established systems of care. But overall, it's going to be up to each individual facility to look at what they're doing, what their care sets are, compared to this, and seeing what interventions they may need to do to optimize care for their patients, which is really what the name of the game is at the end of the day. We're all here for patient care.